First of all, I would really like to express my appreciation to the editorial committee, the reviewers, and to Wiley Publishing Company. This has truly been just simply amazing for both me and for my colleague, Vanessa Jackson, who is at the University of Kentucky. When she called me and told me that we had received this award, I said to her, you know, receiving this award and writing this paper was just like writing this book upon which this paper was based on. This book was a labor of love for us, and the book was not published. Vanessa was not one of the editors of this book. This book was published by me, Dorothy Midsteifer, and Gladys Gary Vaughn. This book is entitled African American Women Contributions to the Human Sciences. And this morning, when I was attending the session related to the book that Sharon just published, I thought about the problem that exists within our profession. When we think about the history of the profession, there are a lot of gaps and a lot of missing information. The same thing is true when you think about the contributions of African American women to what we call the human sciences, family, and consumer sciences. There is a large gap, or the information does not exist at all. Gladys and I talked about this issue for a very long time, and both of us actually feel, you know, you can talk about an issue, but the question is, what are you going to do about it? So we decided that we would work on writing the book, and that we did. After the book was written, we had 37 African American women in which biographies or autobiographies were submitted related to their work over a long period of time. The length of time that most of them had worked in the profession was something, the average was about 31 to 40 years. We tried to get a cross-section of younger professionals as well as, I would say, more advanced professionals. So that's how we went about doing this and writing the book. As I said, we felt that the study was very critical for the profession, for African American women, and also for women of color. Because when we think in terms of the absence of information related to African Americans, it's also an absence or a gap in information for other women of color. So that makes it very critical for us to look at the profession from a multicultural perspective. So we were trying to fill that gap. What we also looked at was the question pertaining to what theoretical framework would we use in trying to look at the data from the book. And of course, coming from an ecological perspective, we thought about the ecological perspective, and important to this ecological perspective was the theory of resilience. When one think in terms of resilience, there are quite a few definitions of resilience, so many different definitions of resilience. You have to make a decision about what definition you're going to use for your particular research that you're conducting. So we looked at the strength model of resilience. And we used Unger's perspective on a strength model where he really purported that when individuals face different struggles and challenges, there are a lot of complexities that occur, and what they have to do is to actually navigate the system, and they also have to negotiate for resources in order for them to continue to function in a viable manner within whatever they're doing. This doesn't necessarily relate to just just one particular situation, but that happens in many situations, and I'm just going to digress for just a little because I've been doing some research on homelessness, and the same issues occur in terms of what is resilience. How is it that people can maintain and sustain themselves when they are faced with struggles related to whatever they want to do? But you always have to look at it from the perspective of opportunities also. So moving on to our methodology that we used a statistical package for qualitative analysis, which is called ATLAS. And what we did was to do a content analysis, and out of the content analysis, we kept seeing that there were basic themes that went through all of the biographies and autobiographies. So there were about 7 themes that we used to pull together and do a content analysis of the information that we found in the biographies and autobiographies. And an example of some of those themes were related to inequities in education due to segregation, the importance of advocacy, the value of education, self-efficacy, personal mentors and mentoring, and what actually motivates resilience and commitment to the profession when you're faced with many obstacles. And one thing that's very important in, I would say, the African American community and other communities is having faith in the concept of spirituality. Sometimes you have to have faith to survive almost anything. And some of the findings that we came up with, since this was a qualitative study, one was that these African American women really realized that their struggles to establish resiliency and strategies, they had to do this to maintain our existence in the profession. Another was a foundation for their survival was the importance that was placed on the value of education. And the value of education was really emerged from families, and many of the individuals who participated in the study, they may have been first generation, being of the first generation attending college. Some of us were second and third generations, but there was always this value of education. The historical efficacy of education to the African American community in general emerged. And when you ask the question about mentors, we found that the mentors were family members, they were parents, they were ministers, they were teachers. All of these individuals served as mentors. And as I stated before, the resilience was really motivated by faith and spirituality, despite the institutional barriers that existed for us over time. Another thing that we found that was very interesting is that the individuals in the study really had a worldview which brought to the profession more of a multicultural perspective in terms of issues in addressing those for individuals, families, and communities. So our next question was, so what we found is, what do we do with this information? I feel a lot of times, and I've said this many times, and this is not just related to African Americans, it's related to professionals of all of us, regardless of ethnic background in the profession. We always talk to the choir. You know, we don't talk to a larger group or expand outside of the profession. So we felt that we had to give the profession some advice. So what we, some of our recommendations were that in the human sciences, we need to capitalize on the rich backgrounds and the diverse experiences of professionals, not only African Americans, but African Americans and our professionals of color. We need an ethnically diverse task force to really look at being more inclusive of African Americans and professionals of color in problem solving and really analyzing different issues critically. And I think that, perhaps I shouldn't say this, but sometimes I'm very outspoken anyway. If you look at officers of this particular association, and you look at who is elected in these positions, and I will say no more related to that. And we felt that as a profession, the human sciences and family and consumer sciences could really be a model in terms of interacting more with legislators and people who are lawmakers, and making sure that we are communicating to them about what we do in our profession. The other two are related to the profession really allocating resources to make sure that we are more inclusive than exclusive in terms of inclusion. And the last one is looking at organizational and institutional programs and experiences and practices so that we can really close the gap and make sure that we have expanded our net as widely as it can be expanded in terms of making the difference for our next generation during the 21st century.